Disclaimer: this video is for entertainment purposes only. Please do your own research, as these clips haven't been fact-checked.
They've been hiding the true answer to this question from us. Why are these doors and windows halfway in the ground? During the early 19th century, strange events were reported worldwide. Cities were being dug out from layers of mud and debris. Buildings were being revealed that were covered to their rooftops in mud. A global cataclysmic event buried entire civilizations, erasing them from history. But here is where it gets rather unsettling. The Tartarian Empire, an empire often depicted in old maps, was an advanced civilization that existed across Europe and Asia. They built architectural marvels, had access to advanced technology, and were able to harness energy from the atmos. The Mudflood, many say, was a deliberate attempt to wipe out Tartaria from history, hiding their advanced technology and knowledge. But it gets even darker. Look at the world's fairs of the late 1800s and early 1900s. These elaborate buildings, resembling ancient architecture, were supposedly built in just a few years. After the fairs, they were supposedly demolished. Was this to erase evidence of an advanced pre-existing civilization? The Chicago World Fair in 1893, the Paris Exposition in 1900, and the St. Louis World Fair in 1904. These events showcased magnificent architecture, and on official papers they were apparently built with plaster and wood. Do these look like temporary structures to you? The sudden disappearance of these architectural marvels raises the question, were they remnants of the Tartarian Empire, conveniently disguised as temporary exhibits and then destroyed to hide their origins?
The Tartaria mud-flood theory is a controversial hypothesis that suggests a catastrophic event took place in the 18th or 19th century, resulting in a massive flood of mud that covered entire cities and wiped out entire civilizations. According to this theory, the civilization of Tartary, which was once a powerful empire that covered a large part of the Eurasian continent, was destroyed by this event, and its existence was deliberately erased from history by the ruling elite. One of the main pieces of evidence cited by proponents of the Tartaria mud-flood theory is the presence of mysterious buildings and structures in various parts of the world that seem to be older than the officially recognized timeline of human history. These structures, known as megaliths, are often made of large stone blocks that would have been impossible to move and erect using the technology available at the time they were supposedly built. Another piece of evidence cited by proponents of the Tartaria mud-flood theory is the strange architectural features found in many old buildings in Europe and elsewhere. These features, such as strange windows and doorways, seem to have no practical purpose and are unlike anything found in modern architecture. Proponents of the theory argue that these features are remnants of an older civilization that was destroyed by the mud flood. There are also claims that the Tartaria mud-flood theory is supported by geological evidence. Some researchers have pointed to the presence of sedimentary layers in certain regions of the world that seem to indicate a massive flood event took place at some point in the past. Other researchers have claimed that the soil samples from various parts of the world contain high levels of unusual substances, such as iridium, that are typically associated with meteor impacts or other catastrophic events. Proponents of the Tartaria mud-flood
So you want to know more about the mud-flood? That's good. That's real good. Alright, listen to this. So the mud-flood was a catastrophic event that happened roughly 150 years ago, wiping out many civilizations and burying many buildings under mud. Many ancient structures that we see today was once buried. All over the world, you can find these buried structures, and we literally had to dig them out from the mud. And every now and then, we stumbled across sinkholes, uncovering buried buildings. And this is the reason why so many buildings have windows partly buried in the ground. If you notice with this one, the windows get smaller and smaller, and sometimes you see buildings with windows like this. Trust me, that's not a basement, because if you keep digging, you will see the original front door. Oh my days. So anytime you come across buildings like this, you're dealing with mudflood.
We are finding the truth about our past. And the truth that this place that we live is incredible. It's filled with perfection. And we have been distracted from it for far too long. When you walk down the street, you will now see the previous civilization's work in your city, because they are honestly everywhere, and they deserve our attention. Henry Cobb, the first Henry that we were given, is a character that needs to be covered. Here we are given a list of buildings that Cobb is credited with knocking out over 100 years ago. There is one specifically that caught my eye, and that is the Chicago Federal Building. And let's take a look at this picture for a minute. We have shown this type of nonsense before, so let's do it again. They show this fake wagon sitting on the dirt road with more people that are identical next to each other in white. These are not real people. They are all photoshopped. If we zoom in on it, you can clearly see that they are duplicates. They are copy-pasted. And the other one is all glitched out. And who just stands in the middle of a road anyway? None of it fits in. You have a massive building, yet you have horse and wagon, and you have dirt roads. If it rains, the dirt is going to become so wet, and you will not be moving any limestone. Yet this was never an issue for the mainstream narrative. The dirt is always looking like it had just been raked and perfected for the photo. There's a dirt road down the street from my house, and they have to fix that thing all the time. Otherwise, there's massive holes in it. There are no holes in this picture. It's a perfect dirt road. I'm at the point where I'm going to say that this was prepared for the photo in our new civilization. The dirt is sitting on top of the past civilization's work. These buildings are under the dirt. They are much bigger than we can see. This is not the original road. It's all backwards. The road always comes first in construction because you need to be able to access the construction site. This is obvious stuff that the narrative ignores. Like we said, getting the materials there and the machinery would be nearly impossible with dirt roads and donkeys and wagons. If it snows or rains, then just forget about it. Other than a few fake people, a couple fake wagons and a light post, this is in Chicago. And we all know that Shalaga is not abandoned. There are literally no people in this photo. My point is that if this is true, that these are Photoshop people in wagons, which is looking more and more clear that this is the case, then was this the very first picture of this building for our current civilization to see? It's strange, especially when we hear the story about the building. We are finding the truth about
Russia is where you can find some of the most conclusive evidence of the mud flood. It should come as no surprise for those who know when you look at old world maps and you look at things like Russia's coat of arms and the relations with the Tartarian Empire in the last reset, the mud flood. These scenes that we see from Russia, the fully intact log cabins in Moscow, should come as no surprise why we see so much evidence of the last reset here in Russia. The Siberian forest, for example. What a huge difference less than 100 years make. Speaking of Siberia, you ever wondered why most of the world's forests are under 200 years old? It is because, in my opinion anyways, most of them were buried under the mud in the last reset less than 200 years ago. But this is just a small sampling of the hundreds of pictures I've collected of the mud flood from Russia. And even more so, the thousands and thousands of pictures I've accumulated over the years from around the world. As I've said before, this is realm-wide. In every country, in every continent, in nearly every city. Let me know what city or country you want to see next, and I'll see what I can dig up for you. Question everything, friends. Until next time.
What is going on in this picture, and why are there pillars under the US Capitol? And why are there buildings on top of buildings? All of these questions lead you to the mud flood. And you may ask, what is the mud flood? The mud flood is a worldwide cataclysm that happened almost 200 years ago. This event wiped out many civilizations and buried many cities worldwide. This would explain why there are so many buried temples and structures around the world. And keep in mind, this was a worldwide event. And just look at this picture of these guys that dug up a statue at Easter Island. Look how far they had to dig down to reveal the whole structure. This just comes to show how huge this flood was. And you may ask, how in the world is a mud flood possible? Watch this video of dirt turning in the mud with the correct frequency. And many people believe the civilization before us were the great Tartarians. But but that topic is for another video. I highly suggest you look into the Mudflood. It is a super interesting topic. And I always suggest you do your own research on these topics. Like and follow for more content like this.
Oh, we've got your ass. We've got your ass now. Now this is what it looked like after the last reset. So after the fall of the Tartarian Empire, there was a lot of Tartarian tech just lying about, and the settlers, which you know as the founders, moved in and salvaged what they could. I mean, how many times have I told you that these men with the horse and wagon did not build these structures, and this is not their technology? Are you trying to tell me that they would build train tracks, tram lines, and cars, but didn't know how to build an engine? Come on, brother. This is what it would look like in today's day and age. It's like somebody riding up on a horse, finding a jeep, but didn't have a key, and decided to use horsepower. And this is why they used to say, what in tarnations is going on? Because when it came to Tartaria, they didn't have a clue. Oh, we've got your ass.
What are your thoughts on Mudflood?
Oh,
well,
I think that goes along with the Younger Dryas impact theory,
but
right? Check this out though, real quick. I want you to watch this because this is fucking bananas. Same account.
We set out to empty ponds that residents said were bottomless. The Longyu Caves, located in the village of Xian Beijun in Zhejiang Province, China, are a massive and majestic ancient underground world. The Longyu Caves, also known as the Shaonanhai Stone Chambers, are thought to date back to at least 2,000 years and represent one of the largest underground excavations of ancient times, as well as an ongoing mystery that has confounded scientists from every discipline that has researched them.
The thing about it is, whatever their technology was that existed to make the pyramids, it was different. We make everything out of metal and glass, and that shit's not gonna be here in 10,000 years.
So I want to hit on this one a little bit. I think this is very, very obvious, but this is a great one. So this is architecture from like the 1400s, right? When people, if we go by the history narrative, they were told that they were on like chariots and horses, and they were supposedly riding the chariots and going through the times and whatever else, but they were building things like this. These are things built out of gold, right? There's gold in here. There's all different types of precious metals. There's all different types of crystals, stones. I mean, look at the architecture. Do we really think that a hammer and a chisel, right, created all of this? It almost looks like someone sculpted it with their hands. They did not build these buildings, right? It doesn't even make any sense. So this is old world architecture, stuff we don't learn about, right? Because this changes the narrative on how we think. Now, if we fast forward to 2020 and how we build, right, based on all the modern technology that we have now, cranes and these and power drills and everything else, this is kind of what we build, right? That's just a reflective mirror wrapped around a piece of metal, right? So if you kind of look back at the old world time versus the new world time, you see a big difference. And that's why they don't teach us about this. That's why they don't teach us about the old world history, about how there was a very advanced society that was unified across the world, building everything like this. They demolished a lot of those buildings with the different resets of the wars so that we would not know our true history.
So you've seen Memphis, Tennessee before, but have you really seen it? The one where everything was unbelievable. Like this Parthenon here that they built. Of course, they had a pyramid right near it, and lit up beautifully at night. All kind of stuff, the post office and the courthouse. Here's the cotton exchange. And it was all built by these people here that you see. It's a staggering difference between the buildings and the people. And that's what we see all over the place, in almost every city. There wasn't many old photos, but most of these are from 1880 through 1900. And they're very telling. Very few people for these big buildings. And they're all of the neoclassical style. They're all of this very similar design. Of course, if you ask a historian, they'll tell you it was millionaires and the thousands of laborers.
The great world's fairs of the 1800s were some of the most beautiful things that you might ever witness. Many of them were built only to be temporary, and they were destroyed afterwards. Many millions of people attended these events. Not only were they beautiful, but they showcased all kinds of new world technologies, like the telephone, light bulbs. And when you compare these world fairs to modern day building, the question arises, how did they do this with the technology at the time, and how did they do it so quickly? I think if you've seen any construction sites, even in the past 80 to 90 years, everything seems to take a lot more time now. I mean, do you think we could build a 600-acre fair or a 1,200-acre fair like here in St. Louis within a matter of a few years? I just don't think it would even be possible. Something has definitely changed, and maybe it's the people.
This is a panorama of the 1901 World's Fair in Buffalo, New York. And as the narrative goes, everything you see here was temporary. Built in less than 2 years, torn down after only 6 months. In that 6-month time, this fair had 8 million visitors in the 350 acres that it sat on. Today, the fairgrounds of Buffalo look unrecognizable. Only a few temporary buildings remain out of the hundreds built for this fair. And as beautiful as it looks in the daytime, it looked even more beautiful at night. Over 250,000 light bulbs were used for this rainbow city, with the 410-foot electric tower being the center point. Just imagine this massive scale, all built with horse and buggy. Does the narrative add up to you? Question everything, friends. Until next time.
These buildings were built by the prior civilization, master builders, old world order.
Westminster Cathedral. Do we build anything like this today? And apparently they knocked this out in only 8 years, starting in the late 1800s. We just don't use donkeys and chisels like we did back then. And then you take a look at the modern buildings opposite, which probably took way longer to construct and look like crap in comparison. And it looks to me as if this door was designed for someone way bigger than an average-sized human. These look like Mudflood windows that have simply been converted into vents. And as you can see inside, there's no danger of hitting your head on the ceiling. I think this was clearly designed for someone other than us, and it's probably a lot older than we're being told.
So I want to share some pictures here of these world fairs that were going on in the 1850s to the early 1900s. There have been some earlier world fairs starting in the 1790s, but the first great exhibition was held in London in 1851. Over 6 million people attended this fair. The exhibitions occupied dozens to hundreds of acres and were built in a matter of months to a couple years, only to be completely demolished after.
Do you stay up at night worried about the next Great Reset or Mudflood? Well, if you do, I'm here to tell you, just like the Bible says 365 times, have no fear. Because that Mudflood that you might think the evil controllers of this world created for a Great Reset isn't at all what you think. In fact, I think there's evidence all over this level flat realm we live in that it wasn't caused by a Great Reset at all, but something much different. Something I'm gonna circle back to in just a minute. Because whether you realize it or not, you're living in a spiritual world where once upon a time, God asked his watchers to watch over humanity, but instead they lusted. They lusted after human women, and instead of watching over them, they mated with them, and they created abominations, giants that destroyed this level flat plane we live on. And the leader of those watchers, those fallen angels, just happened to be Lucifer, who this painting was done of in 1797. Lucifer, who, whether you realize it or not, is being worshipped all over this world. Lucifer, who is also known as Satan and the devil. Lucifer, who they're referring to in this Bible verse about an angel coming down with the key to the great abyss, and he laid hold the dragon, the serpent of old, who is the devil and Satan, and bound him for 1,000 years, and threw him into the abyss, into the earth, and shut and sealed it over him until 1,000 years were completed. And after these 1,000 years, he must be released for a short time. Did you ever notice how the Statue of Liberty has chains on it like he was bound? And here's where we circle back to these giant craters that are left all over this level flat realm. And to me, I know, because there's a firmament and there's no asteroids coming in, these aren't giant craters from space rocks. They're something else. And do you know how many watchers there were? How many fallen angels that came down and mated with human women? Well, the book of Enoch talks about 200 fallen angels. And do you know how many craters there are found all over this level flat realm? That's right, 200, and they are all named. And some of their names are a little mind-boggling. So what I think the Great Reset and the Mudfloods are is nothing more than those 200 fallen angels, including Satan and Lucifer himself, coming up from their captivity of 1,000 years, and they're here to deceive the nations. To deceive the nations, to fool people into believing that God doesn't exist, to fool people that they're evolved from monkeys, to fool people that they were created from an accidental Big Bang, to fool people that they live on a spinning water ball of infinite other spinning water balls. None of it's true. We're living in a time where the deception is so grand that you can't even wrap your heads around it. And the point of it all is if you can choose light and choose good and choose God instead of the darkness and instead of the evil. So it's up to you. You can believe in all the nonsense, or you can focus your attention on the light and the good and God. Because in my opinion, this nonsense about human resets, it's nothing more than scare tactics to make people who know there aren't asteroids coming from space and aliens coming from other planets, it's a way to keep them afraid. But the resets, they're not real. The only thing that's real is God and the fallen angels, and they're here, and they're deceiving us. And once you know they're here, trying to deceive you, trying to turn you away from God, it's easy to see the path to take, and it's away from darkness. And as always, all of this information is just my opinion. I'm only here to entertain.
Could it be a possibility that we are living in Satan's little season? If you don't know what this is, it is the time after the 1,000-year reign of Christ, and Satan has been released to deceive the nations once more. If that sounds crazy to you, just hear me out. It sounded crazy to me at first as well. But let's consider the fact that Jesus had literally told those standing in front of him that some would not taste of death till they saw his return. There are many more verses that just don't make sense if we have been waiting for over 2,000 years after these things were spoken. When I had first heard about this, I thought that a lot of people were just saying that the reason they believed this was because of all the wonderful architecture that had been left behind. I truly think that a lot of people just take all this for granted and never really question how all this could have been built in light of the fact that at the time all these people were riding around on horse and buggy. If anything, what it does for those of us who are paying attention is that it gives us perspective. Now, what I mean by that is it shows us the vast contrast between the people and the buildings around them. Another thing, there is also something called Lichtenberg figures that can be found all over the earth. Now, a Lichtenberg figure is formed when there is an electrical discharge, and this has been replicated in real time so we can see the similarities, and people have done these tests. What's really interesting is that it also appears as if a third of the earth has been burned up, just as the Bible says in Revelation. A third of the earth is literally desert. Can it be a coincidence? Maybe. But how many coincidences do we need to see before we start realizing that something catastrophic may have happened in our not so distant past? Is it also a coincidence that where you find these Lichtenberg figures, you also find what look like to be melted buildings? We've been told our whole lives that these are rock structures, but upon closer examination, these clearly don't look like natural formations. The evidence is right in front of us, and it always has been. The problem is that we've never known what we were looking at up until now. And once it's pointed out to you and you see it, you can no longer unsee it. There is also historical proof from first century writers who recorded many miraculous events that happened at that time. Josephus recorded that, quote, chariots and troops of soldiers in their armor were seen running about among the clouds and surrounding of cities. Another historian named Tacitus recorded, and I quote, in the sky appeared a vision of armies in conflict, of glittering armor. Another historian, Josephon, recorded also, and I quote, moreover, in those days were seen chariots of fire and horsemen, a great force flying across the sky near to the ground, coming against Jerusalem and all the land of Judah, all of them horses of fire and riders of fire. This would seem an incredible account if it was only stated once. But here I have presented 3 accounts outside of the biblical account that seem to support events mentioned in the Bible that come to pass at the destruction of the Temple of Jerusalem in 70 AD. The Bible states that out of the mouth of 2 or 3 witnesses, a thing is established. Guys, this has always been around us and in front of us. We just never knew what we were looking for, or we never knew what we were looking at. If we don't know our past, then how can we know our present or our future?
2 Peter 3:10. He talks about the earth and the elements melting like wax with fervent heat. And isn't it weird that all over the world, including the United States, Canada, Mexico, Europe, Russia, China, Asia, everywhere, there are evidences of melted pagan structures. I mean, I don't know how could you get more accurate than what the Bible says about all of these structures that nobody has a good theory about, at least a good theory that we could believe.
Nobody really tells us why all of these ancient pagan structures are all burnt to a crisp.
Nobody explains it to where it makes sense. But I tell you what does make sense. Apostle Peter, in his second epistle, chapter 3, verse 10, he tells us that the earth and all of its works shall be burned up on the day of the Lord. So, check it out. Supposedly, that was supposed to be the end of the world. But let me know what you guys think. Does this match the narrative? God bless.
Why is nobody talking about this? In the 1560 Geneva Bible, there are some very interesting notes on the sidelines here. In Matthew 16:28, it says, "Verily I say unto you, there will be some of you that stayed here, which shall not taste of death till they have seen the Son of Man come in his kingdom." The notes reads, this was fulfilled in his resurrection. In Mark 13:30, it says, "Verily I say unto you that this generation shall not pass till all these things be done." The notes say this word signifies the space of 100 years, albeit this came to pass before 50 years. And in Luke 21:32, Jesus says, "Verily I say unto you, this age shall not pass till all these things be done." The notes say, for all these things came within 50 years. Again, if all of this is true, and the lost books of the Bible that I showed you in the last video says Jesus was here in the year 5500 was his resurrection, and the Geneva Bible is telling you 50 years after his resurrection came the millennial reign, where are we really? So if his reign was in the year 5550 and it lasts 1,000 years to 6550, where are we now on the timeline? We're in the time of Satan. We're in the little season. And that's quite obvious for what's going on in the world today.
A physical manifestation of the millennial kingdom. If the devil was bound, you'd have a time of peace and prosperity. And then maybe you would have a time where people could create grand buildings, create grand art, music, everything. We don't even understand, probably because I do believe the devil is very active today, as most people probably understand that follow me. The devil, the demons, they are super active. We don't even know how many negative effects that they inflict on us all the time, because we wrestle not against flesh and blood. We don't know how much our thoughts get cloudy because of spiritual darkness around us. And then again, you put that on a macro scale, like everybody's affected by this spiritual warfare and oppression. If that was lifted, if the devil was bound and put in a pit, is that possibly that humans could do a lot more than they do now because there was this freedom in your own mind, your headspace, to not be inflicted by these demonic beings? I think that you couldn't help but have physical results of that. So if the saints are ruling in heaven and they're doing it better than the corrupt sons of God, I believe there would be positive effects on the earth, and we'd be able to see the evidence of that. And maybe that evidence is the grand buildings, the grand cathedrals, the art, the statues and stuff. It doesn't mean that everyone was perfect on earth, but it does mean that there was an allowance for people to do more than they're doing now. There's